The Pontiac Grand Prix Turbo was in fact reworked and reinforced by not only ASC but also McLaren. This wasn't some rare collectible with only 10 units made for the entire world. This was a real project that took place from 1989 until 1990 with a little over 4,000 units made. Many people completely forgot about these for many reasons, but it was never because they were bad cars. Things were finally starting to turn around after many years of detuning and regulations. With that being said, there were a lot of different options to pick from during this time, and unfortunately these Grand Prix Turbos slipped right through the cracks.
First debuted in Detroit, this car was crafted by two leaders in the auto world known for excitement and style: General Motors Pontiac Division and ASC McLaren.
The 6th Gen Grand Prix was introduced in 1988 and would live on until 1996. Previously, they were on the G-body platform and were rear-wheel drive. Now, these Grand Prix were on the all-new front-wheel drive W platform. Also on this platform were the Buick Regal, Chevy Lumina, and Olds Cutlass Supreme. Over its 9-year production run, over 1 million Grand Prix sold. Pontiac, the excitement division during this time, was super popular. Actually, in terms of sales numbers, they were ranked number 3. Throughout the years, different trims and body styles were offered. For 1989, there was Grand Prix, Grand Prix LE, and Grand Prix SE. At first, SE models, which was the performance-focused trim, came with a 2.8-liter 4-cylinder that made 130 horsepower. Midway through 1989, GM's new 3.1-liter V6 would replace it and made 10 more horses. These SE models came with different wheels, hood louvers, extra body cladding, and other cosmetic changes. Interiors were also different from base models. With the introduction of this new GM10 platform, it was liked among many critics, along with the public. Like I said, over 1 million units sold. The Grand Prix SE was Motor Trend's Car of the Year for 1989. That same year, the Grand Prix was the pace car for the Daytona 500. These Pontiacs were also featured in the movie Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. Because the Grand Prix was Motor Trend's Car of the Year and Gorbachev was Time Magazine's Man of the Year, GM decided to send him his very own Grand Prix, and of course the color red, with the vanity plates reading Gorby. If you don't believe me, I don't blame you, so I'll have you all watch this ahead for proof.
Dear Mr. Gorbachev, recently you were voted Time Magazine's Man of the Year. So the Team Pontiac dealers of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut thought it only fitting that you should drive Motor Trend Magazine's Car of the Year, the Pontiac Grand Prix. So in the spirit of international exchange and a demonstration of American know-how, please accept this gift. We selected one in red. We thought you'd like that.
The world was in a completely different place during this time. It's always interesting to look back at. With such success, why not experiment a little bit and come up with an even higher output model? Doing something like this could be very profitable for Pontiac. One of the prototypes for the Grand Prix was featured in the Hot Rod magazine in November of 1987, a few months before the W platform was available to the public. The name for this prototype was the Pontiac Grand Illusion. These had that new 3.1-liter V6 that made 305 horsepower, had a 5-speed manual, and WS6 suspension, just to name a few highlights. As it turns out, this illusion would become very real in the middle of 1989. In simple terms, Pontiac got the green light to produce an image-building vehicle for the Grand Prix. And what better company in the 80s than ASC, or American Sunroof Company, to assist in this build? But it doesn't stop there. McLaren Specialty Products would also join this project, and together, along with Pontiac, would create the Pontiac Grand Prix Turbo. American Sunroof Company dates back to the mid-60s. They were especially popular in the mid-80s to early 90s with the ASC Mustangs, Capris, Dakota convertibles, Turbo Trans Ams, the list goes on. This McLaren isn't the Formula One team or the team responsible for the iconic road cars, rather from the automaker's powertrain engineering department, which is still a big deal. ASC and McLaren have worked together on many different occasions. The most popular product from the two would probably be the Buick GNX. I think Pontiac felt like this project was going to be a huge success. We have the right platform, we have a great team, and this could be very profitable for them. The idea for this project was to take a fully loaded Grand Prix SE to the next level. And after mid of 1989, the engines in these SEs were those 3.1s good for 140 horsepower. So there was definitely room for improvement, but we do have a different engine to work on. McLaren tackled the drivetrain project. This means the turbo conversion, the thermal testing, tuning, certification, and other components. An iron block was added with 20% nickel content to improve strength. Forged rods were used, special oil pump, unique intakes, aluminum heads, stainless steel exhaust, rally-tuned suspension, and of course it was factory intercooled. With all of that said, what were the power numbers for the Grand Prix Turbo? Well, they achieved 205 horsepower and 220 pound-feet of torque, with a top speed of 128 miles per hour. The only transmission available was a 4-speed automatic that was tweaked to handle the increase in power. This may not seem like much today, as many 4-cylinders can easily exceed that amount of power, but for '89 this was impressive. For reference sake, the top-of-the-line Trans Am GTA with a 5.7-liter V8 made 225 horsepower. Speaking of the Trans Am GTA, back in 1990, these things cost more than them, which is kinda crazy to think about. Actually, this was the second most expensive Pontiac in the lineup at the time. The only other Pontiac to be more expensive was the Bonneville SSE. The base price for one of these Grand Prix Turbos was $25,500 in 1990. That's close to $63,000 in today's money. The Taurus SHO and Thunderbird Super Coupe of the time were a few grand cheaper as well. In terms of how these handled and performed, they did well considering its size and weight. They were almost 3,500 pounds and were front-wheel drive. Motor Trend tested the 0 to 60 time at 7.9 seconds, but I've seen other sources test 7 seconds flat. However, when it comes to a hard stop, the back tires could potentially lift off the ground. Never seen that before, but it can happen to the Grand Prix Turbo. With the videos and pictures that have been playing, you would realize that these had some cosmetic upgrades over the SE models, and this is where ASC comes into play. The flared bodywork, functional hood louvers, exhaust tips, 16-inch gold basket wheels which resemble those of the Trans Ams. I've heard that these wheels are a real pain to clean, and a few other little changes. I personally think that these capture the time era perfectly with its design. The excessive body skirts and body cladding were quite common during this time. The ASC McLaren Mustang, the S10 Cameo, the SSEI, the 325i, and so on. There were 2 paint options to pick from, either black or red. The paint for these turbo models was unique because it was applied by hand, and it was a much higher grade than the other Grand Prix. The interior of this car is where things start to show who Pontiac was in the mid-80s to early 90s. The first thing that catches my eye is those seats. My god dude, those look comfortable. They were 10-way power adjustable too. Another thing is the steering wheel with all of those buttons. There are buttons everywhere in this car. I took the time to count each and every button, and I got a grand total of 72 different buttons. I feel like some of the newer cars still need to have buttons, especially for climate control. Just a touchscreen, in my opinion, is a little too much. See this as a positive or negative, but because the steering wheel is covered in all those buttons, there's no place for an airbag, so Pontiac had to add automatic seatbelts. Many people hated these things, and it's really easy to understand why. They were a real pain. The only options consumers could add were a disc player, a sunroof which was $650, and leather upholstery. The reason for such limited options is because these were fully loaded. They even featured a pass-through panel, which was a nice European touch. I wish more cars had this feature. I'm forgetting one of the biggest highlights of this car's interior, its heads-up display system. Now, this wasn't the first car to feature this technology, but it wasn't all that common in 1989. The 240SX and Maxima, to the best of my knowledge, had this as an option, as did the Olds Tornado Trofeo. Never mind, the Trofeo did not have this as an option, but it did feature some advanced technology for the time, as did this Grand Prix, especially with its navigation system. These Grand Prix Turbos were really nice cars, but they were also very expensive. Like I said, the Thunderbird Super Coupe was cheaper, it came with a manual, and it was rear-wheel drive. The Eclipse, Laser, or Talon could be had in all-wheel drive, 5-speed manual, were cheaper, and were also faster with the 4G63 engine. There were plenty of other two-door coupes to pick from, but the point remains the same. For 1989, these Grand Prix Turbos were introduced mid-model year, and because of this, less than 800 sold. For 1990, with a full model year, only around 3,500 units sold. So if you have your heart set on one of these, good luck, because very rarely do they pop up for sale. But if they do, they're not like 50 grand like some of the other coupes that were around during this time. The Grand Prix Turbo would get the axe after 1990, as it would be replaced by the Grand Prix GTP. Those GTPs came with a naturally aspirated 3.4-liter V6 that made 210 horsepower with a 5-speed manual. This was the same engine in the Z34 Monte Carlos and Luminas. Looking back at it, we have all these factors going into this turbo/intercooled V6, just for it to be outperformed by a 3.4-liter built-in-house a year and a half later. In terms of tuning and power capability, I really have no idea if the Turbo or GTP can take on more power. Whatever the outcome is, from a modern perspective, I do like these Grand Prix Turbos. However, I do feel like there were better options for the price. And there you have it, the Pontiac Grand Prix Turbo. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you've owned one of these by the rare occasion, be sure to add any information I missed or that I got wrong. I think next video will take place in the 70s, or I'll maybe try the 60s. I don't know, we'll just have to see. With that said, enjoy the rest of your week, and I will try to see you all next week.